What's up, everyone, and welcome into episode number 466, where there is a lot to talk about, some good, some bad, and some absolutely horrible and concerning play happening. And that is obviously the Detroit Tigers. Their slide just continues to get worse. They've lost 10 out of the last 11, on track to lose this game tonight against the Blue Jays, so losing 11 out of the last 12 games. And this has just been absolutely horrible baseball. And outside of like this year, outside of kind of the stretch that they had last year to get into the playoffs, I've talked a lot about losing baseball. And unfortunately, that's just what they're playing right now. They're not competing very well. There's a compete issue. Pitching just isn't going well. Hitting, they're not having good at bats. And this is a team for at least 3 months was probably the best team in baseball. I know obviously baseball being a long season, 162 games, obviously teams go on slumps. But this is a slump that is really, really concerning because you do not lose 10, 11 out of 12 games and be a good team. Now, I know there's obviously some fans that are saying, hey, look at what they did the first 3 months. Absolutely they did great. But like the last 11 games has been a real issue for this team. Like pitching, they're not getting good starting pitching outside of Tree Schoolball. Bullpen has not been good. No one's hitting. Riley Green striking out a lot. Torque, at least in the last 2 games, have hit 2 home runs, so obviously that's positive. But this team is getting outscored by a lot. Like they are getting blown out in home games, and I believe they've actually gotten blown out in more home games than they did all of the first half in the second half of the year. And then you have the Guardians going on a hot streak, and I believe at this point it's probably down to 7, 8 games between both of these teams. This is a real possibility that we could be talking about really close race headed into September if the Tigers just continue to unravel. And this is kind of the unraveling we saw last year in the AL Central that allowed the Tigers to get back in. The Tigers just got hot at the right time. The teams above them just unraveled. And obviously, there's still a long ways to go, but there's some really, really, really concerning things. And another big concerning part of this team is that this month is not going to get any easier. Like, if you look at this month, it's a really, really difficult month. Like, you have a real possibility here of losing several series. And if you continue to lose series, if you have the Guardians, if you have the Twins, if you have the Royals continuing to play better, that's not going to be great headed into September baseball when you're playing the most important baseball, fighting for a playoff spot. And at this point, headed into an All-Star break, to say that there's a real possibility here that they could be fighting for a playoff spot, that's just not something I think a lot of people thought was a real possibility. And obviously, they're still up a decent amount in the overall AL Central. But again, like there's some real concerning things and trends that are really happening with this team. And some of it is just simple plays. Like sometimes they just can't get the ball over to the first, and it's a routine play. I don't know what is happening. This team needs a spark. This team needs Scott Harris to do something. And there's been reports about Scott Harris not being willing to trade some of his best prospect, top 5 prospects. We've seen some moves where the teams have gone to go get good players that didn't cost them a top 10, top 5 prospect. So it's not something that isn't obtainable, but the Tigers just don't want to completely sell in on this year. But you just can't allow this type of collapse to just continue to happen and stand by. And I think that's the biggest frustration for Tigers fans is that it really seems like while the Tigers are going to be buyers at the deadline, there's some fans that are wondering, like, should the Tigers sell? And I think that's a little ridiculous in my opinion because guess what? You're still up a lot in this division. Now, again, that can change really quickly, but you need to bring an impact bat. You need to bring a couple bullpen pieces. Just really hope that a couple of these guys that are really struggling kind of just revive this team because this team is just not there, and it just doesn't seem like they have that compete. It just doesn't seem like they're prepared for these games, and they just give up 1 or 2 big innings every single game, and at that point, the game is over. They just don't have enough right now to come back and win these games, and the last two games, the Tigers were the first team to score. Like it was 1-0, and then this past game, they gave up a huge inning. They gave up a huge inning today, 5 earned runs. Like you just can't afford to do that and expect to win a lot of the games. And the Tigers, unfortunately, have been doing that quite often. It's really concerning. Obviously, they can turn around. Obviously, they have good players. They have good pitchers, especially Tree Schoolball. But there's going to be a lot of concern regarding this team, and rightfully so. So there's definitely some frustration, and I think the Tigers really need to do something to kind of get this team going. And it's not just picking up guys on waivers. It's going to go make a move. It's going to go trade for a guy. And I think Scott Harris needs to do that as soon as possible. It might mean trading some guys that are impactful. It might mean trading some of your top prospects, but you need to bring in someone that's going to really help this team, or there's going to be real concerns and there's going to be real issues coming in September unless the Tigers completely turn things around, which is possible because, again, they're the best team in baseball for 3 months, and there's a reason why that is. But right now, this team does not look anywhere close to the best team in baseball. This team looks like one of the worst at this point. And unfortunate because you had a lot of momentum going, you had a lot of hype going, and then going into the All-Star break, All-Star game, and outside of that, just feels like all that hype is gone. Feels like fans are more frustrated. And it's not really a horrible position to be in, being up like 7 games and fans are frustrated. Could be worse, but it truly feels like at times kind of the world is ending with this team, with these fans being frustrated. And honestly, like I said, I think they rightfully are frustrated, and this Tigers team needs to make a move, or this Tigers team will continue to falter, or maybe just one of these players start to step up and kind of get this team going. I think Riley Green's going to have to be one of those guys. Hopefully Wenzel Perez, hopefully these couple home runs by Spencer Torkelson will kind of get this team going. But these are home runs that are games that aren't even close. And unfortunately for Spencer Torkelson, really can't do much when you hit a solo home run when it's 6-1 and it's a game that's kind of over at that point, unfortunately. So maybe the Tigers can turn around and win their game tonight. Fully don't expect it, honestly, the way that the Tigers are playing. But maybe they'll surprise me. Maybe they'll surprise you. Maybe they'll get a win, and maybe a comeback will kind of spark this team and go on a run. But unfortunately, they're just not playing that way, and they have another chance to win tomorrow. And if they do that, maybe they can finally start getting going. But you need to win one game at a time. You need to find a way to get good pitching. You need to find a way to get better at bats, and if you can do that, maybe you can go on a run and maybe help this losing streak maybe not be as impactful as it is, because it's really, really impactful for this team as well. But that's really it for the Tigers. I do want to quickly address one other thing with Detroit teams that are not really a great thing overall, and that's the Michigan Panthers are being relocated. So no more Michigan Panthers. There are several reasons why this happened. One was it seemed like that Ford Field was extremely expensive. Cost, I think, $250,000 to just open the stadium for a game, which obviously is really expensive, but also seems like just like the UFL and like the XFL are kind of rebranding. So unfortunate for Michigan. I think you had a lot of fans that really kind of bought into this team. I believe the last home game they had like 16,000 fans, which again isn't nothing big, but for kind of this league, it's pretty decent. I know fans are upset about it. It's just the way it is, and they're just going to rebrand it. And unfortunately, just doesn't seem like things went well, and there's going to be no more Michigan Panthers. So I feel bad for the coaches, feel bad for the people in the front office, feel bad for the players. Hopefully they're still given opportunities, and hopefully maybe things can end up working out where you end up having a Michigan team again. But this will be the last year for at least the Michigan Panthers for the future, but maybe there's a possibility that comes back. So really don't like that news. Really don't think it's fair. I really don't think it's good at all. I think Detroit, if you have a fan base that buys in, I think it's a fan base that will buy into this team. I think they started to do it. You saw them make a championship appearance last year. It's going to be something that this city is going to miss. But when you have that expensive of a stadium and you're not doing well overall, that really can hinder what you're going to do in kind of like the long-term part of the league. So sucks, but just part of business overall. But that's really it for kind of the bad news. I wanted to get the bad news out of the way because who likes bad news? No one likes bad news whatsoever. Like, I don't think anyone enjoys hearing that stuff. I don't think anyone has enjoyed what the Tigers have been doing. I don't think anyone's super happy about the Panthers. But let's get into the more bigger news. We got some Lions news. Lions are less than a week away from playing the first football game of the year. Obviously, the Hall of Fame game against the Chargers. You're not going to see a lot of the starters. You're not probably going to see any of the starters. You're going to see a lot of the backups. You're going to be able to see a guy like Kyle Allen. You're going to be able to see a guy like Hendon Hooker compete for the backup spot. I think this first game is going to be actually really important for both of them because it feels like Kyle Allen, at least from reports and observations I've read from training camp, has really been surprising. Like, he's not a quote-unquote, like, going to be a starter guy. Like, he's not going to compete and dethrone Jared Goff. Like, that's just not happening. Like, Jared Goff is going to be QB1. But he's been really consistent when he hasn't made mistakes. He's been able to drive down the field. Now, Hendon Hooker has looked better and has made better plays, but I think this first game is going to be really interested to see which kind of quarterback takes the reins, which quarterback is more efficient, which quarterback does not make mistakes. I think this could be a real big opportunity for both of these guys, and I think it's going to be really, really fun to watch who kind of takes over that. And I think it's going to be fun to watch this Lions team play overall because this Lions team is ready to hit. And today was the first training camp day of pads, but that doesn't mean this team wasn't physical prior to that. Like, there was times in the past couple of days outside of today that Dan Campbell had to stop practice because things got too physical. He actually had to kick a guy out because it got too physical, and they were kind of wasting too much time just being too physical, obviously without the pads. But it really seemed like today when the pads came on, the team just started popping and just hitting each other. You have Terrion Arnold make a huge hit that actually popped a helmet off. Terrion Arnold was part of the news recently. He got hurt. There was really concern about that. He did practice today, so obviously that's a good sign. Derek Barnes was another guy that got hurt his hand. He practiced today as well, so that's obviously a good sign as well. Tyleik Williams did not practice today. He was not seen. It doesn't seem like there's too much concern. I think he was talked to and basically said he's like 100%. So Tyleik, I think, is going to be completely fine. But this is a defense that is going to be obviously led by new defensive coordinator Kelvin Shepard. And he was recently today, had his press conference, talked about the team. And he basically said that Aiden Hutchinson looks better than he did last year, which I think in itself is just a statement that is just crazy because we all know how good Aiden Hutchinson was last year before his injury, and that doesn't guarantee you that he's going to have the stats he had last year or better stats, but like every time Aiden Hutchinson comes back from a really big injury, it seems like the next year he's even better, which I don't know how that is real, but like you saw he got really injured at Michigan, came back, had a great year. So hopefully he can have that. It sounds like Marcus Davenport. I know I've talked about my concern about the defensive end position. Brad Holmes not going and getting a guy going to get a Zadarius Smith. I've talked bad about that. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. If Marcus Davenport stays healthy, turns out he's been a beast in training camp. Hopefully he can stay healthy. Speaking of edge, they did seem like there was a report that they did talk to Matthew Judon, which is the former GVSU defensive end. He was also a former Patriot as well. So there is some conversation going on there. I don't know if that will necessarily lead to anything overall, but that just is an interesting fact that really happened today. And then, obviously, like I said, this was a really, really physical training camp so far. And Dan Campbell talked about that. He said that basically we find out who's who today. And I think we kind of started to find out who's who. It really seems like this is a kind of like a Jack Campbell-led defense. Dan Campbell said that that was the fact, and Jack's kind of taking over at that point. That's really led to some interesting discussions on Alex Anzalone. He hasn't been practicing in training camp. Now, it doesn't seem like this will prevent him from missing games. He did specifically say that, but he also said that it's leading to a really interesting situation, a weird situation, because he obviously wants a new contract headed into his last year. He also did say he wants to retire as a Lion. Like, we all know how impactful Alex Anzalone was on the field when he did play compared to when he wasn't on the field last year. Like, this defense took a massive step back even after Aiden Hutchinson was injured when Alex Anzalone was not on the year, which kind of makes a little bit of these comments from Dan Campbell a little bit interesting. Now, he did kind of address those comments a little bit and basically said that, hey, there's no love lost. Like, there's no issue between us and Alex Anzalone. There's no concern there. Like, we still really like him. There's still communication there. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to end in anything bad happening. That doesn't also guarantee that it's going to be a contract extension. Like, they paid Derek Barnes this offseason. They're going to have to pay a lot of these guys as well. Like in Aiden Hutchinson, they're going to have to try to extend. There's a couple other guys that they're going to have to try to extend in the future. Like, you can't extend all these guys. And while Alex Anzalone, again, has been extremely impactful, when you've already paid a guy like Derek Barnes and you're saying that Jack Campbell is going to be the future kind of guy, I really do wonder if this is going to be really kind of interesting to see what happens with Alex Anzalone. Maybe he gets another year extension. Maybe he gets a lot of money for that, just to say, hey, thank you for playing for us. We got a lot of cap space left. Maybe here's a little bit more bonus money, or they could get it extended and maybe get a couple more years out of that. So a couple of really interesting situations to watch out for. Do I think it's going to impact this team overall? No, not really. And I think it's going to be one thing that's going to kind of hopefully keep this team from having issues in the future with contracts. You're going to have to make some really hard decisions, and that's just kind of part of it. But yeah, no, overall, it seems like things are going really well for the Lions. Hopefully they can obviously stay healthy. That's the biggest concern so far, is you have injuries throughout training camp. The major concern is just try to stay healthy as long as possible. Make sure those injuries aren't super bad, and hopefully they can kind of continue to do that. And hopefully this offense can kind of get things figured out as well, because obviously they're led by John Morin, who was not the offensive coordinator last year. Ben Johnson currently over in Chicago. Doesn't really seem like they're changing too much. Some things are the same. Some things are getting changed slightly. It seems like maybe Jahmyr Gibbs might be actually in the slot and out a little bit more, so he might be catching quite a few more passes, which I really like. I think you're going to see Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery on the field at the same time quite often, which I think is going to be a really, really fun combination to have. And then obviously you have Amon-Ra St. Brown. You have Jamo. I think Jamo is going to have a big year. Isaac Tesla had a couple of really great catches today. He mossed a corner earlier today. You have Tim Patrick. This offense is going to figure things out, and you have an offensive line with Tate Ratledge that's getting more time at center. You have Glasgow getting time at guard. Like, they're going to figure things out, and hopefully once Taylor Decker comes back, you'll kind of have that offensive line figured out and have that offensive line out there. But like I said, you're probably not going to see a lot of these guys in the Hall of Fame game. You're going to see a lot of the backup guys. You're going to see a lot of the guys that's really going to be trying to fight for roster spots at that point. But yeah, that's really it for the Lions. Two last things I really want to talk about. We'll get into Big Ten Media Day because there's some really interesting quotes and some things to talk about there. But before I get into Big Ten Media Day, it was announced, I think yesterday, that MSU basketball will be having an exhibition game with UConn for the next 2 years. It will be at UConn this year, at MSU next year. That's going to be a really fascinating matchup. I think it's going to be a really physical matchup. I think it's going to be obviously a very competitive matchup. We all know that Tom Izzo is not afraid to schedule some really great teams. This upcoming non-conference schedule is going to be really, really difficult for MSU, and this is just another game that obviously doesn't matter towards the record overall, but is really going to kind of test this team and see how good this MSU team is without like a Caleb Glenn obviously being injured, and then obviously you don't have Jace Richardson, you don't have Jane Akins. Like, you really need to kind of figure out what this team has, and I think this exhibition game will kind of tell MSU and the fans a little bit of what this team can expect. And I do think you're going to see some issues with the team early. I think this team is going to try to have to figure things out. If they end up playing well, you're going to see a lot of fans reacting and saying this is going to be a great team. If they don't play very well, there's going to be some panic, and that's just kind of what college athletics is at this point. Obviously, I think Izzo's going to have this team ready, and it's going to be a really, really fun matchup between the Michigan State Spartans and the UConn Huskies, who's won 2 national championships in the last 3 years with Dan Hurley. So that's going to be really fun to watch. And the last really funny thing to talk about is obviously Big Ten Media Day. There's obviously always some great quotes. There's always some great stuff that comes out of Big Ten Media Day. It was actually in Las Vegas this year, which is unusual, but I think that's pretty cool. I know a lot of people didn't love it, especially because it's not really close to anyone outside of kind of the West Coast teams. But if you're kind of a reporter and you like Las Vegas, it's kind of a cool opportunity, but it's also weird that the Big Ten send them out to Las Vegas. But yeah, the Big Ten Media Day just really happened. Obviously, Sharon Moore and Jonathan Smith talked about it, and I really want to kind of get into Michigan first, and then I'll get into MSU second, because Michigan, last couple of years, I don't think it's unknown, but there's been some incidents after games, and Sharon Moore basically said, that's not happening anymore. There's going to be a new tradition at Michigan. They're going to go over to band until the other team leaves. Will that happen? Probably. It wasn't probably the most noteworthy news of the week for Michigan, but there was also a couple other things that they talked about that I thought that was really interesting. One of them, I don't believe. I think he's just kind of being coach speak for the most part, and that is an open competition at the QB position. Everyone knows it's going to be Bryce Underwood. Like, I understand there's the idea of coach speak, right? Like, you don't want to say Bryce Underwood is going to be the starting quarterback. But everyone knows he's going to be. So it's at this point of, like, what's the point of saying it? Maybe to help the backups, maybe give them a little bit more confidence. Maybe you'll kind of go the 2 quarterback route for the first game and try to see how things go. But guess what? Your schedule starts to get hard. At least you got the game at Oklahoma. And I think if you're Sharon Moore, I think you're wanting Bryce Underwood to play as many snaps as he possibly can before that away game at Oklahoma. Now, after that, that gets a little bit easier. And I know that Jake Butt, I believe, said a statement earlier today or yesterday that we'll find out what this Michigan team is really made out of in the first 4 games. And I'm going to kind of push back on that because I don't think the first 4 games is really that difficult outside of Oklahoma. And even Oklahoma wasn't really that great last year. Obviously, it's not really easy to go on the road, especially in Norman, and beat them. But there's a real possibility that Brent Venables gets fired after this year at Oklahoma. And obviously, it's a homecoming for Sharon Moore. You got a new starting quarterback, which obviously makes it a little bit difficult, but when you have a guy like Bryce Underwood that has so much expectations on him, that it was rated as highly as he was, he's going to have unfair expectations on him. And I think this coaching staff in Michigan needs to do a good job of not pushing too much on him. And I think that's one thing that he really talked about as well, is kind of balancing the offense, trying to run, but also trying to use the pass a little bit more. And he did talk a little bit about running the ball quite a bit, and he basically pushed back on that, and Sharon Moore basically said, hey, J.J. McCarthy won the quarterback of the year for the Big Ten. Yes, he did, but Michigan also still ran the ball quite a bit, and I think that should be Michigan's approach. In my opinion, I think they should use the run to open up the pass. I think they should do everything they can to make it as easy as Bryce Underwood can, and if they do that, I think they'll lead to success. But you got a big game against Oklahoma. You also had an announcement earlier today that you're going to be facing Western Michigan in Germany next year, which is really cool, but also really interesting. I know that some fans were making fun of Michigan State for moving their game to Detroit. Now you have a game in Germany, which I think is going to be a really unique opportunity for not only the coaches, not only the players, but fans that travel as well. I'm kind of really interested why they did Western, even though they're like 90 minutes apart. Like, it's not really something that you'd see too often, but hey, you get to play week 0, you get all the eyes on you, and then guess what? You get a little bit more time to prepare for Oklahoma next year as well. Maybe that's why Sharon Moore did it, so that he gets an extra week to prepare, which honestly wouldn't be really that bad of an idea overall. But last thing I really want to talk about before I kind of get into Michigan State side of things and kind of wrap up this podcast and this episode is that Sharon Moore has always and will always kind of talk about how important team is over me. And that's kind of the goal for this team is you have to buy into this team and you just can't buy into yourself. And I think that's what Michigan has done ever since Jim Harbaugh is buying into the team over the individual. And we've seen success with that. And last year, while they did struggle, Sharon Moore did also talk about how they're not really that far away from competing, how they beat the national champion last year. They didn't have a great offense. They didn't have a great quarterback. But guess what? You got a new quarterback. You have opportunities here to get better on the offensive side of the ball. And even without a great offense, you still beat the national champion last year as well. So he doesn't think it's too far away. I'm going to be really interested to see what this offense looks overall, especially with Bryce Underwood under the helm. And then, again, Michigan's going to have a great defense, as they always do. So that's the Michigan really coverage for the Big Ten Media Day. I want to get into MSU before I wrap up there. Jonathan Smith obviously had a press conference during this. The biggest thing he talked about was continuing the roster from last year to this year, about from year one, year two, and the importance of that. And I think Michigan State did a really good job of doing that. And one thing that I was listening to on Locked On Spartans that they talked about is that some teams use NIL to go get players. And I think MSU absolutely did a good job on that, especially secondary, especially wide receivers. But the important part is trying to use NIL to retain the guys you need to retain. I think MSU, for the most part, did a really good job of that. And even if you say Charles Brantley could have been a guy, he was kind of out of MSU several different times. So I don't think any MSU fan expected him to come back. But it really seems like Jonathan Smith has done a good job of bringing the guys back that he needs, the important guys, the guys that are going to be factors that are going to help this team build from year one to year two. Now, another huge factor of building from year one to year two is obviously the importance of the offensive line. And Jonathan Smith talked about this, how important this offensive line and how important this offensive line needs to take its next steps is the key to how this team does. Jonathan Smith, while at Oregon State, he was most successful when he was able to run the ball more than throw the ball. He used running the ball to set up throwing the ball. He wasn't able to do that last year. With an improved offensive line, there's a real possibility that MSU can do this. Now, again, it's going to factor in how big of a step Michigan State is going to have, how big of a step these returners are going to have, how good these transfers into this team is going to be. The offensive line is the biggest need and the biggest, really, improvement that this team needs to have. And if a guy like Sam Rammel, which was also at Media's days, is able to take that step, they're able to have a good offensive line, that's really going to help out, obviously, Aiden Childs. That's really going to help out the run game. That's just going to help out the offense overall. And Sam Rammel talked about that, about wanting to be able to run the ball and how MSU expects to run the ball and how they're trying to be physical and how they're growing and basically this whole situation that MSU is in. And he sounds really excited, and he also had one of the most memorable quotes out of the whole media day, especially at MSU, where he talked about wanting to see couches burn in Michigan State, and which is basically means they want to pull these upsets, and they want to get to a point where these upsets are not unusual, where they're not even upsets. And obviously, not saying they condone burning couches, but you kind of get the idea that as a player, he wants to see MSU see these upset wins, and he wants to win a lot. He knows that this team is bought in. It seems like you have a lot of these players that fully believe that they can win and that they want not only to win for themselves, but to win and bring Michigan State back to what it was in the mid-2010s. Like, they want MSU to get back to that point. I think one real factor that's really going to help Michigan State hopefully get back to that point is Aiden Childs. And Jonathan Smith basically talked about how when he forces things, it isn't always best, and how he was better in the second half because of it. And sometimes how it isn't the worst thing in the world to get to second down, to punt, like not to make the mistake throws, not to make the mistake plays. And I think Aiden Childs did that better in the second half Now, do I think he was a little bit too conservative in the second half of the year? Yeah, I think he needs to kind of balance being too conservative, but also using his legs, using his arm to make plays down the field. Aiden Childs are going to make throws that you're going to be wondering, why did he make that throw? But the most important part is limiting those mistakes. If you can limit those mistakes, if you can take care of the ball, if you can use your arm, if you can use your leg, if you can have a better offensive line, which it seems like MSU believes that they will have, this is going to be a better team offensively, and I think that's going to really play a factor in to what MSU can do to hopefully possibly go to a bowl game for the first time in a couple of years, to also hopefully pull off a couple of upsets as well, which I know again Sam Rammel and this coaching staff really wants and thinks fans deserve. But yeah, that's really kind of it for media days. That's really it for the Lions. Super excited about the Lions. You have the Panthers unfortunately relocating. You have the Tigers unfortunately not playing very well right now. But obviously don't want to talk too much about those. I already talked about them enough. We got some exciting news and exciting times coming up next week with the Lions. We got a couple hopefully wins coming in the future for the Tigers as well. And then the next episode I'm really, really excited about. It's an interview with a great player. He's back. He's already joined the podcast. Really fun interview with him. And then the next one will be another interview as well. It will be a different interview, but it'll be one that you'll definitely want to watch out for. So, yeah, really appreciate everyone listening into this episode. Usually it's not this long, so if you've listened this far, really appreciate it. But yeah, that is a wrap to episode number 466. Thank you for tuning into this episode, and tune in to the next one.